مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. الجو حر جدا مناخيا وسياسيا في الوقت الذي يعاني فيه أكثر من 100 مليون أميركي من لهيب الحرارة المرتفعة. هناك 300 مليون أمريكي يشاهدون ديمقراطيتهم تتعرض للمحاكمة تلفزيونيا من خلال جلسات الاستماع للجنة الخاصة بتحقيقات أحداث 6 يناير. ما يشاهدوه الأمريكيون من ديمقراطيين وجمهوريين معا هو أمر مخيف، فهناك محاولات لتأجيج العنف والفوضى كالتحديد حياة نائب الرئيس الأمريكي لأضعاف نتائج الناخبين الواضحة في انتخابات 2020. ما تأثير هذه الأحداث على مسير الرئيس السابق دونالد ترامب؟ وهل ستؤثر على انتخابات نوفمبر القادم؟ هل ستلقي بظلالها على ما تبقى من ولاية جو بايدن الرئاسية؟ لمناقشة سياسات جلسات الاستماع لأحداث 6 يناير يسرني أن أستضيف الصحفيين المميزين أليكس بولتون وDavid Hawkins. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. In the most recent installment of Real Life is Stranger Than Fiction, I give you the January 6th commission hearings, prime time on national television, better than anything Hollywood could dream up. That's for sure. Let's take a closer look with Alex Bolton and David Hawkins. Gentlemen, it's been 18 months since the terrible events of January 6th. Hundreds of journalists have written thousands of stories with millions of words, but there's still so much to learn. When you look back on the hearings, which are now concluding for the summer, these high-profile hearings, what did you learn in the last few months that you didn't know beforehand? David, let me start with you.
Well, I think the degree to which this House committee has gotten inside the West Wing on January 6th and in the days leading up to January 6th, and the degree of vivid, almost lurid detail that we've learned about the rivalries within the White House, the factions between the Trump loyalists who viewed themselves as sort of constitutionally serious and the so-called crazies, the degree to which the president himself kept vigorously pursuing all manner of different ways to try and cling to power, right through January 6th itself, where there's a minute-by-minute account of his behavior, allegedly wanting to go to the Capitol to join the mob, allegedly that then when that didn't happen, sitting and just doing nothing for 3 hours but watch Fox TV, his favorite television network, the degree to which he was told over and over again that these ideas were illegal, that the mob was getting out of hand, that he needed to intervene, and how he said no to that at every turn, and right down to what happened the next day after January 6th on the 7th, when he gave a speech to the country purportedly to condemn what had happened the day before, and he edited it in such a way that he wouldn't even acknowledge that the election was over. So we sort of knew the basic outlines. Donald Trump didn't want to give up power, but the novelistic, I mean, as you say, truth is stranger than fiction. This was as crazy as you could ever imagine.
And Alex, what for you was the most surprising revelation in the hearings?
I think the testimony that had the most impact was from Cassidy Hutchinson, the aide to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Here's someone who was seen by Republicans as a credible witness, as someone who was loyal to the Trump administration, and she painted a portrait of the president as intemperate and as angry and vengeful and lunging at his Secret Service detail and demanding to be taken to the Capitol, to be part of the protest, the armed protest. The image of him flinging his lunch against the wall when he learned that Attorney General Barr had, in an interview, said that there was no evidence of widespread fraud. I mean, we have the portrait of a president who's out of control, really.
One other thing that a Trump announcement would do is make it much more difficult for the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, to indict him. And we've seen hesitation on that part. How do you explain what's going on the legal side, David? And do you expect Merrick Garland to bring charges against the former president?
Well, that's exactly where I was going, which is that they, with each passing day, we learn more and more about how intense and widespread the investigation by the Attorney General is. We should just remind our viewers that this is separate and apart from what Congress itself is doing. This is a wholly separate investigation by the Department of Justice. And we believe from what we've learned that the Department of Justice is not so much focused on the events of January 6th as on all the other things that the president and his allies were trying to do in advance of that, to try and without getting too bogged down in civics for this audience, to essentially try and come up with fake voters, fake electoral college voters, remembering that ultimately the presidency is awarded by state, by slates of electors from each state. The Trump people tried to come up with fake electors to vote for Trump in states that had voted for Biden. That seems to be where the Justice Department is going. In addition, there's a widespread, increasingly widespread investigation in Georgia by prosecutors in the state of Georgia about Trump's efforts in that state. So with each passing day, we get closer to a decision by Merrick Garland. Do I think he'll do it? I don't know Merrick Garland. I mean, I know Merrick Garland by relation. I certainly don't pretend to know. I mean, enormous political pressure. This would be transformative if the Attorney General brings a federal indictment against a former president. That would be unprecedented. It would galvanize Trump supporters for sure. It would make the 2024 election and Trump's efforts to run in the 2024 election sort of all about that grievance by the president, and it would change the dynamic completely. But it would be a high risk thing. Merrick Garland would need to believe, if he's going to indict the president, I believe that for political reasons, he'd need to believe that he could convict. He'd have to have a high degree of confidence that he could win a conviction.
All right. When we come back after the break, I want to talk about even broader ripples of the January 6th commission hearings, how it affects other former high-ranking officials in the Trump administration, how it affects members of the commission, and how it is likely to affect our November 2022 congressional elections in just a moment. August is supposed to be a quiet time, but historically, especially in terms of the Middle East, it's not quiet at all. It was 30 years ago this month that Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein defied the predictions of many experts and diplomats and marched his army into neighboring Kuwait and tried to swallow it whole. One of the most egregious examples of naked aggression in modern times. Remember the U.S. response? With a little push from Margaret Thatcher, President George H.W. Bush famously declared, "This will not stand." And so began the process of building the greatest military coalition since the Second World War, with 500,000 American soldiers, sailors, and airmen at its core, a coalition that expelled Saddam from Kuwait early in 1991. Contrast that with the American, and indeed the global response to the most recent example of naked aggression, Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. This time we're fighting to the last Ukrainian to expel the invader. Different times, different enemies, different responses. Again, my guests today include Alex Bolton. Alex is a senior staff writer at The Hill, a newspaper offering in-depth reporting on the politics and policy in our national legislature, which is where he covers Congress and the broader American political scene. Also joining us, David Hawkins. David is senior editor of The American Leader, a nonprofit taking on America's biggest systemic problems. He was also the founding editor of thefulcrum.com, and he spent 2 decades as senior editor at CQ and Roll Call, 2 must-read newspapers covering Capitol Hill. All right, Alex, what about some of the other major public figures who played roles in January 6th? Vice President Mike Pence, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. How have they been impacted by these hearings, and what repercussions are likely to be felt on this leadership level from what is going on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think Pence has come across quite well in these hearings. He resisted what we all knew to be very heavy pressure from the president. I think what was painted in vivid detail is how he refused to leave the Capitol, even though his safety was in jeopardy, even though maybe his life was in danger. He said, "I am not going to leave here," because he was worried that he would not be able to get back to the Capitol to actually certify the election. So I think it was a moment of heroism even for Mike Pence, and even Democrats grudgingly acknowledged that. Someone suggested he should get the Congressional Medal of Honor. So that's an that's probably over the top, and of course it is. He didn't. But on the other hand, he came across as well. And I think what's interesting, though, is that Pence hasn't really sought to capitalize on it. He's looking at a presidential run himself in 2024. He has not gone on offense against the president. Instead, he's gone on offense against Joe Biden. He knows that he's going to need Trump voters to win the White House or even to win the Republican nomination. But I think he comes across as a principled conservative, and it's it reflects well on him. Beyond that, I think Rudy Giuliani, he was, I think, pretty much discredited after the, his failed attempts to, argue before judges and before courts that there was widespread, evidence of fraud. He has come out as he has been painted in an unflattering light, in these hearings. I think in the last hearing, they played audio of him essentially, continuing to urge members of Congress to support overturning the election and making no mention of, the violence of January 6th, kind of being in complete denial. The other, official who I think has come off very badly is Jeffrey Clark, the environmental lawyer at the Department of Justice, who tried to engineer a coup at the DOJ, and now he is under investigation. But beyond that, Mark Meadows remains kind of an enigmatic figure. It seems at times he encouraged the presidents, but at other times, seemed to have concerns on his own, where this all was going. He has not, he won't testify before the committee, but he did provide a trove of text messages to the committee that actually, laid out a pretty, interesting and detailed map of what was happening right before January 6th and on January 6th. So, but the focus really has been on the president, and I think that's why these hearings were to look closely at Trump's personal involvement, and we see that he was in fact very personally involved. So,
David, Alex just underscored how much this focuses on the president. These are the third series of congressional hearings, 2 impeachments, yes, and now this set of hearings, all focused on the president's alleged misdemeanors and high crimes and that sort of thing. Why does this set of hearings seem to have a bit more resonance even than the impeachment, the 2 impeachments of the president?
Boy, that's a great question. I would say because it's visual, because the country can see it, because the first impeachment, if you asked me before I'd had a second cup of coffee in the morning today, what was that about? I'd have a little bit of a hard time even distilling it again into 1 or 2 sentences. The second impeachment, of course, happened after he left. I think it just didn't galvanize the country the way it might have. And but this one, which was second impeachment, was about first impeachment was about did the president meddle in Ukraine of all places back before Ukraine was a global front page news. Second impeachment was about his behavior on January 6th, but it was sort of rushed, and we don't have anywhere near the evidence that we have now. This one, as we've said from the top, it reads like a novel. It reads like an incredibly visually appealing, richly detailed. People can understand it, and I think with each additional hearing, as Alex has said, that we focused in on this one on Trump himself and what he did, either overtly by sins of commission or sins of omission by simply sitting still. It's very easy to see.
And Alex, I know we focused so far on whether this is going to speed up Trump's announcement 2024. What impact do you think all this will have, if any, on 2022, the election in November?
I don't think it's going to have much impact at all. In fact, I've spoken to a number of senators, Democrats and Republicans, gauging their thoughts on how this will impact on the midterms. And the view is it won't have much of an impact at all. The midterms will be driven by the economy, first and foremost by inflation, and then also by the qualities of the individual candidates. And so the Republicans are banking on Biden's low approval rating, voters' dissatisfaction over inflation, the direction of the economy. Democrats are banking on the personal weaknesses of some of the Republican candidates, in particular Herschel Walker in Georgia, who's made some gaffes, and also Eric Greitens out in Missouri, who has a long trail of scandal and controversy behind him. This is not looking to factor at all. Really, where this will have an impact is damaging Trump's credibility, viability, and reputation, and that won't come into play until 2024. Now, Democrats are trying to make 2022 a referendum on Trump, and to the extent that these hearings damage Trump, maybe it helps Democrats a little bit. But I think the expectation is that Democratic voter turnout is going to be quite low. I think that Republicans are going to have a very good election. And so where this plays politically is Trump seems to be a very damaged candidate, but that's really not going to affect the political calculus so much until 2024.
And David, do you agree with that? All this primetime TV, but the real implications are much further down the road?
Well, I think once again it comes back. It circles back to Trump and his own actions. If Trump declares that he is running for president between now and the midterms, there are a lot of Republicans that are very apprehensive about that. I think that's essentially the only thing. That's the only way that this whole matter would become an issue in the 2022 midterm. If Trump tries to make it, as he tries so in general, to make it all about him, tries to make the midterm about him as well, and his grievance and his antagonism towards the committee and his defense of himself, and he just sort of uses up campaign oxygen that would otherwise be easily spent by the Republicans on high inflation, on Joe Biden's low approval ratings, on high fuel prices, on declines in the stock market, et cetera, et cetera. He, Donald Trump, could suddenly make it, well, why isn't this about me like everything else should be? And then it would be. Otherwise, no, I think the hearings themselves, no. I think even right. I think otherwise not. It's certainly not. It's certainly not something that I hear very many Republicans talking about. There's a handful of Republicans, literally a handful, maybe 5, that are making this a campaign issue.
And we should reserve a few moments for Liz Cheney, Republican tried and true, but certainly someone who was going out on a limb in her prosecution of Donald Trump as chief villain of January 6th. What is this going to do to her career, Alex? What do you think?
Well, it's going to end her House career. I think that's a safe bet. She has a primary later this year, and she's trailing her opponent, and she's going to lose to her challenger. By the way, Senator Ted Cruz, the Republican from Texas, who's looking at running for president himself in 2024, just endorsed her challenger. She's going to get So she will lose her House seat, but I think it opens up a whole lot of other possibilities for her, especially if the Republican Party gets over its Trump infatuation.
Very interesting. All right, fascinating. Thank you very much, Alex Bolton, David Hawkins, for helping to explain these very important January 6th investigation hearings and their political impact. Thank you for joining me this week on Dakhel Washington. America is a big, diverse country. It stretches from the Atlantic to the Pacific, spanning 6 time zones between Hawaii and Maine. Its people hail from every corner of the world. While nearly 80% speak English fluently, 16 different languages are the mother tongue of more than 500,000 people in our country. The original metaphor for our immigrant-focused nation was a melting pot, but the reality of America today is closer to a salad bowl with a remarkable array of races, religions, ethnicities, and cultural groups making up American society. Our federal approach to government was originally meant to allow for local differences to be addressed through local government, while reserving certain powers and authorities for the central or the federal government. This system failed us once over the issue of slavery, and the failure was cataclysmic, resulting in a civil war that killed 600,000 Americans and forever scarred our country. Since then, the balance of power shifted, not completely, of course, but with certainty, toward the federal government as a way to avoid such fundamental divisions among the states. Now I fear we are moving backwards. The abortion ruling by the Supreme Court, ending 50 years of a federally guaranteed right of access to an abortion and returning the issue to the decisions of individual states, is a flashpoint, but not the only one. Gun rights and limitations, marriage equality for gay and lesbian people, affirmative action for racial minorities, even laws and regulations governing responses to the COVID pandemic. All these issues and more are now pitting state against state. And in a new twist, states have now begun to legislate directly against other states, with some outlawing their citizens' right to travel to other states to do things that are legal in those states, but not legal in their own. Some states are even offering financial incentives to their citizens to turn in fellow citizens who break these rules. This is how the system begins to unravel. We aren't there just yet, but I fear we are on a slippery slope to legal, constitutional, and ultimately social chaos. Now, I believe in federalism. It has worked for more than 2 centuries, but I worry that an extremist view of it, pitting state against state, citizen against citizen, has the potential to threaten the entire American experiment. If there were ever a time when we need cooler heads to prevail, to prevent the unraveling of the American tapestry, now is the time. I hope we are collectively up to the task. وصلنا إلى ختام هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كان لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول البرنامج وبالأخص بشأن السياسات المتطلبة للانتخابات الكونغرس في نوفمبر، تواصلوا معي رجاء عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ Inside Washington أو تراسلوني مباشرة على الرابط @RobSatloff. إلى اللقاء في الأسبوع القادم. حتى ذلك حين شكرا وإلى اللقاء.